Have you ever had to choose between your life and everyone in school? I was in study hall when I noticed that the substitute security guard walking by looked exactly like my friend Crimson with a fake mustache on. We locked eyes and he stared at me before slipping a folded piece of paper under the door. Everyone was too distracted to notice it, so I walked over and picked it up. You have the chance to live and run, but everyone else dies. My first thought was this had to be some sick prank. But then I saw a small black device with a red button on top. He held it up, making sure I could see it clearly through the glass. I went back to my seat, trying to think. 30 kids in the room, including my best friend Brendan, who was sitting 2 rows over. Mrs. Larson at her desk grading papers. The girl I'd liked since freshman year doing her calculus homework by the window. All of them just going about their day with no idea what was happening. I crumpled the note in my fist and tried to catch Brendan's eye. Tapped my pencil on my desk in the Morse code pattern we'd learned in Boy Scouts. SOS. He looked up confused, but I couldn't risk explaining. Instead, I mouthed 911 and pointed toward the door where Crimson was still watching. Another note slid under the door. This time it said, 60 seconds to decide. Crimson was holding up his phone now, showing a timer counting down. My mind raced through the options. If I ran out right now, I could probably make it to the exit before anything happened. But what about everyone else in the room? What if this wasn't a joke? I stood up and my chair scraped against the floor. Mrs. Larson looked up, asking if I needed something. I couldn't speak. My throat felt completely dry. Brendan noticed something was wrong and started to stand up too, but I shook my head at him. Mrs. Larson, I think I'm going to be sick. The words came out strangled, but she bought it. Go ahead to the nurse. She waved toward the door. 40 seconds left on the timer. I walked toward the door, but instead of heading straight out, I pretended to stumble. Knocked into Jessica's desk, sending her papers flying. She yelped, and everyone turned to look. While they were distracted, I grabbed the classroom phone off Mrs. Larson's desk and shoved it in my hoodie pocket. Crimson was still watching through the window. His fake mustache had started peeling off on one side, but his expression was deadly serious. The device in his hand looked real enough. Some kind of trigger or detonator, maybe. I could pull the fire alarm. It was right there on the wall next to the door. Everyone would evacuate, and whatever Crimson had planned would be ruined. But the second I moved toward it, he shook his head and pointed at the device. Like he'd press it the moment I tried anything. 30 seconds. I opened the door slowly and stepped into the hallway. Crimson smiled and motioned for me to follow him. But I had other plans. The moment the door closed behind me, I yanked the phone from my pocket and dialed 911 while walking. Crimson was too focused on watching me to notice my hands in my hoodie. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was barely audible. Bomb threat, study hall room 204. Hurry, I whispered as quiet as possible. 20 seconds. Crimson was getting impatient. He held up the device and pointed down the hallway toward the exit. I needed to buy more time, needed to keep him away from that classroom. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started running, but not toward the exit. I sprinted in the opposite direction, deeper into the school. Crimson's eyes went wide with rage. He chased after me, shouting threats about pressing the button. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as I took the corner at full speed. The hallway stretched out before me like a tunnel. Trophy cases blurred past on both sides. I could hear Crimson's heavy footsteps behind me getting closer with each second. My lungs burned as I pushed harder. The main office was just ahead, but it felt like miles away. 10 seconds. I glanced back and saw him gaining on me. His face was twisted with fury, and the fake security uniform flapped open, revealing regular clothes underneath. He was screaming something about ruining everything. About how I was supposed to be the coward who ran. How I was messing up his whole plan. I grabbed a trash can as I passed and threw it behind me. It clattered across the floor and Crimson stumbled, trying to avoid it. That gave me just enough distance to reach the office doors. I yanked on the handle, but it was locked. Of course it was locked. 8 seconds. I pounded on the glass with both fists. Could see the secretaries inside looking up, startled. One reached for the button to buzz me in, but Crimson was already there. His hand clamped down on my shoulder like a vice. He spun me around and slammed me against the wall. 5 seconds. We were face to face now. His fake mustache had fallen off completely. The device was inches from my face, his thumb hovering over the red button. Through the window of a nearby classroom, I could see students working peacefully. They had no idea death was standing in their hallway. Wrong choice. His thumb started pressing down. I lunged forward and grabbed his wrist with both hands. We struggled for control of the device. It flew from his grip and skittered across the floor. We both dove for it. My fingers brushed the plastic just as his hand closed around it. He rolled away from me and stood up triumphant. Too late. He pressed the button. Nothing happened. Just a hollow click that echoed in the silent hallway between us. We both froze, staring at the device in his hand. My brain struggled to process what just didn't happen. No explosion, no screaming, no death. The relief hit me so hard my legs almost gave out. It was never armed. Maybe it was never real at all. Just a stupid plastic box with a button that did nothing. Crimson looked down at the device with this confused expression, like he couldn't believe it either. His mouth opened, but no words came out. That 1 second of his confusion was all I needed. I kicked the device out of his hand and it skittered across the polished floor, spinning until it hit the wall. A massive bang erupted from the far end of the building near the gym. The floor shook beneath us hard enough that I stumbled sideways. Every alarm in the school started screaming at once. Fire alarms, security alarms, emergency alerts. The noise was so loud it hurt my ears. Crimson's face showed genuine shock, like he didn't expect that sound. His eyes went wide and his head whipped toward the direction of the blast. I used his confusion to my advantage, grabbed his arm and shoved him as hard as I could away from me. He stumbled backward, trying to catch his balance. The main office door burst open behind me. Hands grabbed my shoulders and yanked me backward through the doorway. I caught a glimpse of the secretary's face, pale and scared, as she pulled me inside. Crimson recovered his balance and took off, running down the hallway toward the emergency exit. His fake security shirt flapped open as he ran. The SRO rushed past the office doorway, shouting into his radio about an active threat and possible explosives. His hand was on his gun, but he didn't draw it. Just kept running after Crimson while calling for backup. The secretary slammed the office door shut and hit the emergency lockdown button. Metal shutters started rolling down over the windows. The other office staff rushed around, pulling blinds and locking interior doors. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. My whole body felt like it was vibrating. The secretary kept asking me something, but I couldn't hear her over the alarms and the ringing in my ears. My mind kept replaying Crimson's thumb on that button, the click, the nothing. Then the bang from somewhere else. My knees felt weak and rubbery. The secretary guided me to a chair against the wall. She crouched down in front of me and grabbed my shoulders gently. Her lips were moving, but the alarm noise drowned out her words. She pointed at my wrist, and I looked down. It was already starting to bruise from where Crimson had grabbed me during our struggle. Purple and red marks shaped like fingers. The secretary asked if I was hurt, and I managed to shake my head. Then I remembered. Study hall. Brendan. Everyone else. I tried to stand up, but she pushed me back down gently. I grabbed her arm and shouted over the alarms about the study hall and the phone call I made to 911. She nodded quickly and moved to the main desk, where another secretary was already on the phone with emergency services. Mrs. Larson's voice crackled over the intercom from study hall. She was using the emergency channel that cut through all the alarm noise. All students accounted for and secured. Doors locked. Following lockdown procedures. Awaiting further instructions. I felt my knees buckle with relief, even though I was already sitting down. Brendan was safe. Jessica was safe. Everyone in that room was okay. The office staff helped me lean back in the chair while police sirens wailed closer outside. Multiple sirens, getting louder by the second. Red and blue lights flashed through the gaps in the metal shutters. Smoke started seeping under the office door from somewhere down the hall, gray wisps curling across the tile floor. One of the secretaries screamed and pointed at it. The fire alarm got even louder, if that was possible. The staff started panicking, talking about evacuating, but the lockdown procedures said to shelter in place. The SRO's voice came over the radio. Decoy device. Not a real fire, just smoke pellets. Stay in lockdown. The building's ventilation system kicked in automatically with a loud mechanical hum. Big fans somewhere in the ceiling pulling the smoke away. We all sat there, breathing hard and waiting for the all clear. The secretary brought me a bottle of water from the mini fridge. My hands shook so badly I could barely open it. Study hall began their directed evacuation through the back corridors. I could see them through the office window that faced the interior hallway. Mrs. Larson led the line of students past our door. Brendan was near the middle of the group, scanning every face, looking for me. His expression was tight with worry. I wanted to call out, but the secretary kept me back with a hand on my shoulder. She said I needed to stay for police questioning, that they'd want to talk to me right away. Brendan's head turned as they passed, and for just a second our eyes met through the window. His face showed confusion and relief and something else I couldn't quite read. Then the line kept moving and he was gone around the corner. More students passed, some crying, some looking scared, some with that blank, shocked expression people get during emergencies, all of them just following Mrs. Larson and trusting she'd get them somewhere safe. Detective Catherine Powell arrived within 20 minutes. A sharp-eyed woman in her 40s wearing a dark blue suit and carrying a leather folder. She introduced herself and immediately asked if I needed medical attention. I showed her my bruised wrist and she called the school nurse over. The nurse was already in the office treating another secretary for a panic attack. She examined my wrist, carefully pressing on different spots and asking if it hurt. I winced when she touched the worst bruise. She said it looked bad but probably wasn't broken, just badly bruised. She wrapped it with an ace bandage from her first aid kit. Detective Powell coordinated with the SRO about securing the building while the nurse worked. Her voice was calm and professional, like she'd done this 100 times before. I gave my first statement sitting in the principal's conference room. The principal wasn't there yet, still on her way from some district meeting. Detective Powell sat across from me with a notepad and a small recorder. She explained that she was recording for accuracy and asked if that was okay. I nodded, started explaining how I recognized Crimson under the disguise. The fake mustache, the security uniform that didn't fit right, the notes he slipped under the door. Detective Powell took detailed notes even though the recorder was running. She asked me to describe the device. I tried to remember every detail. Black plastic, red button on top, about the size of a deck of cards. Her expression grew more serious when I mentioned the countdown timer on his phone. She asked specific questions about the timeline. How long between notes, what the notes said exactly, where Crimson was standing, which direction he ran. My phone started buzzing in my pocket. Over and over, texts and missed calls. I pulled it out and the screen was filled with notifications. Messages from people I barely knew. Friend requests from strangers. The rumors were already spreading on social media. Multiple shooters, someone claimed. Real bombs, another person said. 3 students dead according to one post. All of it completely wrong, but spreading anyway. Detective Powell asked me to silence my phone. She said firmly that I should avoid posting anything that could mess up the investigation. No comments on social media, no interviews with reporters, no discussing details with friends until she cleared it. I put the phone on silent and shoved it back in my pocket, still buzzing against my leg. The door opened and Principal Webster walked in carrying her briefcase and tablet. She looked put together like always, but her eyes went wide when she glanced out the window at the parking lot full of police cars and news vans. She set her stuff down on the conference table and immediately pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved fast across the screen, typing something. She looked at Detective Powell and asked what the current status was. Detective Powell gave her a quick summary about the decoy devices and Crimson's escape, and my statement so far. Principal Webster nodded and kept typing on her phone. She told us she was sending a message to all parents about a security incident and where they could pick up their kids. Her voice stayed calm, but I could see her hand shaking slightly as she typed. She finished the message and hit send, then sat down across from me. She asked if I was okay, and I nodded even though I wasn't sure that was true. The office phone started ringing in the other room. We could hear it through the door. Ring after ring after ring. The secretary's muffled voice answering and then more ringing. Detective Powell's radio crackled with updates about the bomb squad's progress. Principal Webster stood up and said she needed to coordinate with the superintendent. She left the room and I could hear her voice in the hallway making calls. The phone kept ringing. I counted 17 rings in less than 10 minutes. Finally, the secretary knocked on the conference room door. She looked stressed and said someone's mom had been calling nonstop and wouldn't hang up until she confirmed I was safe. Detective Powell asked who it was, and the secretary said my mom's name. My stomach dropped. Detective Powell nodded and told the secretary to let her know I was fine, but needed to finish giving my statement. The secretary left and I could hear her picking up the phone again. Through the door, I heard her say I was safe and unharmed. Then I heard crying. My mom crying so loud I could hear it through the phone from across the room. The secretary said something else I couldn't make out. More crying. Then my mom's voice getting louder, demanding to come get me right now. The secretary looked at Detective Powell through the door window. Detective Powell walked over and took the phone. She introduced herself and explained in a calm voice that I needed to finish my statement for the investigation. She said I could go home within the hour. My mom said something I couldn't hear. Detective Powell repeated that I was safe and would be released soon. She handed the phone back to the secretary and came back to the table. Her radio crackled again. A voice said the bomb squad had finished sweeping the building. Detective Powell asked for their report. The voice said they found 2 more devices in different hallways. Both were decoy noisemakers, loud firecrackers and smoke pellets. No actual explosives, no real danger. The relief in the room was obvious. The secretary let out a long breath. Another officer who had been standing by the door relaxed his shoulders. But Detective Powell's expression stayed serious. She said into her radio that even though the devices weren't real bombs, Crimson's intent to terrorize was still a serious crime. She asked about casualties. The voice said no serious injuries. Just minor stuff being treated by paramedics in the parking lot. Detective Powell stood up and said she wanted to check on the students before we continued. She told me to stay put and left the room. I sat there alone listening to the chaos outside. Sirens, voices shouting, the phone still ringing. Through the window I could see the parking lot. Ambulances had arrived. Paramedics were treating students sitting on the curbs. I recognized some of them from study hall. A girl who sat near the door was holding an ice pack to her ankle. A guy from my math class was breathing into a paper bag while a paramedic talked to him. Mrs. Larson was standing with a group of students looking shaken, but okay. The school nurse was moving between different students checking on them. She had her first aid kit and was wrapping someone's wrist with a bandage. Detective Powell came back after about 10 minutes. She sat down and said we needed to do a longer, more detailed interview. She pulled out a fresh notepad and checked that her recorder was still running. She asked me to walk through the entire timeline starting from when I first noticed the substitute guard. I closed my eyes and the memories came back sharp and clear. Every detail, the fake mustache peeling at the edge, the way Crimson's eyes locked onto mine through the glass, the exact words on the note, the red button on the device, the countdown timer on his phone, the sound of my sneakers squeaking on the floor when I ran, the trash can clattering, the feel of his hand gripping my shoulder. All of it played in my head like a video I couldn't stop. I told Detective Powell everything I remembered. She wrote it all down even though the recorder was running. She asked specific questions about timing and location. Where exactly was Crimson standing? Which direction did he run? What did the device look like up close? What did he say during our struggle? I answered each question with as much detail as I could remember. The interview took almost an hour. When we finished, Detective Powell printed out my statement from her laptop. She asked me to read it over carefully and sign at the bottom. She explained this would be important evidence if charges were filed against Crimson. I read through the pages. Seeing everything written down made it feel more real somehow. I signed my name at the bottom. My hand was shaking. Detective Powell took the papers and put them in a folder. She said I could turn my phone back on now if I wanted. I pulled it out of my pocket. The screen lit up with notifications, texts, missed calls, voicemails. I scrolled through them. Most were from people I barely knew asking if I was okay. Some were from Brendan. I opened his messages first. The first few were asking where I was, then asking if I was safe, then asking why I ran. The last one just said to call him when I could. I hit the call button. He answered on the first ring. His voice sounded tight and weird. He asked where I went and why I ran away from the classroom. I tried to explain about drawing Crimson away so he wouldn't hurt anyone in study hall. Brendan was quiet for a second. Then he said some people were saying I was in on it, that I knew something was going to happen, that maybe Crimson and I planned it together. His voice sounded hurt and uncertain. I felt like someone punched me in the stomach. I told him that wasn't true, that I was trying to protect everyone. He said he wanted to believe me, but things didn't make sense to people. Why would I run toward danger instead of away? Why would Crimson target me specifically? I didn't have good answers. We talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation felt wrong. Like there was a wall between us that hadn't been there before. When we hung up, I felt more alone than I had all day. Detective Powell's radio crackled again. The custodian had found something in a stairwell trash bin. Detective Powell told me to wait and left the room again. She came back 15 minutes later carrying an evidence bag. Inside was the fake mustache and pieces of the security uniform. She said the custodian found them stuffed in the trash on the second-floor stairwell. She showed me the items through the plastic bag. I confirmed that was the mustache I saw and the uniform Crimson was wearing. Detective Powell said this proved my identification was accurate and showed Crimson's escape route. She seemed satisfied. She bagged the evidence personally and labeled it with a marker. Another officer came in with Crimson's phone in an evidence bag. Detective Powell put on gloves and carefully took it out. She turned it on and started scrolling through. Her expression got more serious as she read. She asked if I wanted to see some of what they found. I nodded even though part of me didn't want to know. She turned the screen toward me. Text messages. Crimson talking to someone about exposing cowards, about testing people's true character, about creating situations where people had to choose between saving themselves or helping others. The messages went back months. He had been planning this for a long time. He talked about me specifically. Called me the perfect subject because we were friends. Said I would either prove myself brave or reveal myself as a coward like everyone else. Reading his words made me feel sick, like I never really knew him at all. Detective Powell took the phone back and said they were still going through everything. She seemed to be sharing this carefully, like she knew it would upset me but thought I deserved to know. Her radio crackled again. Officers had checked Crimson's house. His parents said he never came home from his shift at the grocery store. Detective Powell asked if the parents were cooperating. The voice on the radio said Crimson's mom was hysterical. Kept saying her son would never do something like this, that there must be some mistake. Detective Powell told the officers to get a recent photo and check his known hangouts. She asked me if I knew where Crimson might go. I thought about it. He used to hang out at the library sometimes. There was an old warehouse near the train tracks where some kids went to smoke. His cousin lived across town. I told Detective Powell these places. She radioed the information to the other officers. Through the window, I could see more news vans pulling into the parking lot. Reporters were getting out with cameras and microphones. They started approaching students who were waiting for their parents. Principal Webster came back and saw what was happening. She immediately went outside and told the reporters they needed to leave school property. Her voice was firm. She said no media was allowed on campus. The reporters argued, but she stood her ground. She called the SRO over and he started directing the news vans to leave. My phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had posted about the incident on social media. My name was in the post. It said I was connected to what happened. Within minutes, I had friend requests from people I didn't know. Messages asking for details, people wanting to know what I saw. The rumors were already spreading online. Multiple shooters, someone claimed. Real bombs, according to another post. 3 students dead, said someone else. All of it was completely wrong, but it was spreading anyway. I showed Detective Powell. She looked at the screen and shook her head. She told me firmly not to post anything about what happened. No comments on social media, no interviews with reporters, no discussing details with friends until she cleared it. She said anything I shared publicly could mess up the investigation. I put my phone away and tried to ignore the constant buzzing of new notifications. Principal Webster's voice came over the PA system about 20 minutes later. She announced that tomorrow would be a remote learning day, said everyone needed time to process what happened. Police needed to finish their investigation. Her voice was calm, but you could hear the strain underneath. She reminded students about crisis counseling resources available through the school, gave a phone number and email address. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She told everyone not to spread rumors or post unverified information on social media. Too late for that. My phone was still buzzing nonstop in my pocket. Detective Powell looked up from her notes when the announcement ended. She stood and motioned for me to follow her back to where the bomb squad officers were packing up their equipment. One of them held up a clear evidence bag. Inside was one of the devices Crimson had planted. It looked less scary in the plastic bag under the fluorescent lights. Detective Powell explained that the bomb squad had taken apart all the devices. None of them contained actual explosives, just loud firecrackers and smoke pellets designed to create maximum panic. She said this like it was good news, like I should feel relieved. But I didn't feel relieved at all. I felt angry. Crimson had put everyone through genuine terror for his twisted experiment. Made us all think we might die. The fact that the bombs were fake didn't change how scared we'd been. Didn't change the moment when I thought pressing that button would kill people. Detective Powell must have seen something in my face because she nodded slowly. She said she understood, that what Crimson did was still serious, still criminal. The intent to terrorize was what mattered. I heard my name being called from the main office. Mom's voice. She sounded frantic. Detective Powell told me I could go, said she'd be in touch if they had more questions. I walked back through the office and saw Mom standing by the reception desk. Her face was red and blotchy from crying. The second she saw me, she rushed over, wrapped her arms around me so tight I could barely breathe. She was saying my name over and over, asking if I was okay, if I was hurt. I tried to tell her I was fine, but she wasn't really listening. Then she pulled back and her expression changed. She started scolding me, asking why I didn't run straight out of the building, why I put myself in danger. Her voice got louder with each question. I tried to explain my reasoning, tried to tell her about keeping Crimson away from the classroom, but she was too upset to really listen. She just kept saying I could have been killed, that nothing was worth risking my life. Other parents were staring at us. I felt my face getting hot. Mom finally stopped talking and just hugged me again. Then she signed me out at the office and we walked to the parking lot. The drive home was quiet. Mom kept glancing over at me like she was checking to make sure I was still there. When we got home, she made me sit on the couch, brought me water and a blanket even though I wasn't cold. I tried to tell her I was fine, but she insisted. That evening, I couldn't stop replaying the moment Crimson pressed the button. My brain got stuck in a loop of what-if scenarios. What if the bombs had been real? What if I'd run for the exit like he wanted? What if I hadn't called 911 in time? The thoughts spiraled around and around. Mom made my favorite dinner, chicken parmesan with garlic bread, but I could barely eat. Everything tasted like cardboard. She tried to make conversation, but I couldn't focus on what she was saying. After dinner, she finally stopped hovering when I asked for some space to process everything. I went up to my room and checked my phone. Brendan had texted, said he needed to cancel our plans to work on our history project. The message was short and distant, said he needed time to think about everything. I read it 3 times trying to understand what he meant. We'd been best friends since elementary school. Now he was pulling away. I felt hurt and isolated. My best friend didn't fully trust my version of events. Didn't understand why I did what I did. I put my phone down and stared at the ceiling. Tried to tell myself he was just scared and confused, that he'd come around eventually, but it still hurt. My phone buzzed with more notifications. I picked it up and saw a post someone had shared. A false rumor claiming I staged the whole thing for attention, that I was working with Crimson as part of some sick prank. The post had dozens of shares already. Comments from people I thought were friends. People saying they always knew something was off about me, that I was weird, that this proved it. The accusations stung worse than anything physical. I wanted to defend myself, wanted to comment and tell everyone the truth. But Detective Powell had said not to post anything, not to discuss details publicly, so I just had to sit there and watch people trash my reputation, watch the lies spread. I closed the app, but the damage was done. I knew those posts would still be there tomorrow, that people would still believe the rumors. Around 11 that night, I got a private message from Jessica, the girl whose desk I'd knocked into during the crisis. She thanked me for getting help, said she knew I was trying to protect everyone, that she didn't believe the rumors. Her message was simple, but it meant more than she probably realized. A small human connection in the middle of feeling completely alone. I typed back a quick thank you. Then my phone rang, unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A man's voice introduced himself as Sang Cross, said he was a crisis counselor working with the school, that he was reaching out to students directly involved in the incident. His voice was calm and steady. He asked how I was doing, if I was having trouble sleeping or eating. I admitted I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. He said that was completely normal, that replaying traumatic events is a normal response. He taught me some grounding exercises, told me to focus on 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, 1 thing I could taste. Said it would help when my thoughts started to spiral. He explained that the intensity would decrease with time, that my brain was trying to process something overwhelming. We talked for about 20 minutes. By the end, I felt slightly better. Not great, but better. After we hung up, I tried the grounding exercise. 5 things I could see: my desk, the poster on my wall, my backpack, the lamp, my shoes. It actually helped a little, pulled me out of my head. I lay down and tried to sleep, but my mind kept racing through everything that happened, wondering where Crimson was right now, if he was scared, if he regretted what he'd done. Mom checked on me around midnight, asked if I needed anything. I said I was fine, but she could tell I wasn't sleeping. She checked again at 1, at 2. Finally, around 3 in the morning, she just came in and sat on the edge of my bed. Didn't say anything, just sat there in the dark. Her presence was weirdly comforting. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, my phone woke me up. Detective Powell calling. I answered groggily. She said they'd found something. Crimson's forum posts online. He'd been detailing plans for testing people's courage. Had posted about it for weeks. She said he specifically mentioned targeting me, that he'd written about how I was the perfect subject because of our friendship. She offered to send me screenshots, but warned they might be upsetting. I told her to send them. I needed to see. The post came through a minute later. I read his words about how I was too comfortable, too safe, how he wanted to force me into a situation where I'd have to choose, how he predicted I'd run and abandon everyone. Reading it made me feel violated and used. Our friendship had meant something to me, but to him, I was just an experiment, just a test subject for his twisted philosophy. My phone rang again around 8 in the morning. Detective Powell's name flashed on the screen. I answered, and she asked if I had a minute to talk, said she needed to explain something else they'd found in Crimson's posts. I sat up in bed and told her to go ahead. She explained that Crimson had written detailed backup plans for different choices I might make. If I'd run for the exit like he expected, he had a second device planted right outside that door. He was going to set it off the moment I got close, make it look like I triggered something and abandoned everyone. The whole thing was designed so that no matter what I chose, he could twist it to prove his point about cowardice. I felt anger rise in my chest in a way that surprised me. The initial threat had been scary. This calculated cruelty made me want to punch something. He'd turned my moral choice into a trap with no right answer. Detective Powell said she understood my anger and that it was completely valid. She promised they were doing everything possible to find him. I thanked her and hung up. Couldn't go back to sleep after that. Just lay there staring at my ceiling thinking about how Crimson had planned every detail to make me look bad. Mom knocked on my door around 9 saying Principal Webster had called an emergency school board meeting for that afternoon. They wanted student representatives to speak about their experience and what safety measures they thought were needed. Principal Webster specifically requested that I attend if I felt up to it. Mom said I didn't have to go if I wasn't ready. I thought about it for a minute. Part of me wanted to hide at home, but another part wanted to do something useful with all this anger I was feeling. I told Mom I'd go. She drove me to the school and we walked into the boardroom together. About 20 other students were already there, including Brendan and Jessica. Principal Webster stood at the front, looking tired but composed. She welcomed everyone and explained the purpose of the meeting. The board needed to understand what happened from student perspectives, so they could make informed decisions about security improvements. She asked who wanted to speak first. A senior girl raised her hand and talked about how the fake uniform fooled everyone, said there needed to be better ID verification for any staff, including substitutes. Another student suggested panic buttons in every classroom that could alert police directly. Jessica spoke about how the lockdown drills helped everyone stay calm once the alarms went off. I raised my hand and Principal Webster nodded at me. I stood up and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Said that students need to feel safe reporting threats even when they're not sure if something is real. That I almost didn't call 911 because I thought maybe I was overreacting. The board members took notes and asked follow-up questions. The whole meeting lasted about 2 hours. When it ended, Principal Webster thanked everyone for their input and promised concrete changes would be implemented before students returned full-time. 2 days later, I went back to campus to grab some books from my locker. The building felt weird and empty with most students still doing remote learning. I was walking down the main hallway when another student I barely knew stopped in front of me. He crossed his arms and asked if I was the one who was in on it with Crimson. Said he'd heard I was involved and that the whole thing was some kind of prank that went too far. I felt my hands clench into fists. Wanted to shout at him about how wrong he was, how I'd risked everything to protect people, but I forced myself to take a breath. Realized that some people would believe whatever version of events fit their preconceptions. No amount of explaining would change his mind if he'd already decided I was guilty. I just walked past him without saying anything. He called after me asking why I wouldn't defend myself if I was innocent. I kept walking, got my books and left through the side exit. Sat in Mom's car for a few minutes before she started driving. She asked if I was okay, and I told her about the confrontation. She got angry on my behalf, but I said it was fine, that I was learning to let go of things I couldn't control. That evening, my phone rang again. Detective Powell. She sounded excited this time. Said transit authority cameras had captured footage of Crimson boarding a bus the day after the incident. The bus route went to an industrial strip on the edge of town. Lots of warehouses and abandoned buildings in that area. Police were organizing units to search the area systematically. She wanted me to know they finally had a solid lead. I asked if they thought he was still there. She said it was their best guess, that he'd probably been hiding out waiting for things to cool down. I thanked her for keeping me updated. She promised to call again once they knew more. I told Mom about the call and she looked relieved, said maybe this whole nightmare would be over soon. The call came just after dinner. Detective Powell again. Police had located Crimson holed up in an empty storage facility on the industrial strip. He was refusing to come out, kept yelling through the door that he had more devices and would use them if anyone tried to force their way in. Negotiators were on scene trying to establish communication. Detective Powell paused, then asked if I would be willing to record a message that might help calm him down. She said sometimes hearing a familiar voice could de-escalate these situations, make the person feel less cornered and more willing to surrender peacefully. I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing through everything Crimson had put me through. The terror in that hallway, the struggle for the device, reading his posts about how I was just an experiment to him. Why should I help him now? Detective Powell seemed to sense my hesitation. She explained that a peaceful surrender protected everyone. The officers outside, any bystanders in nearby buildings, even Crimson himself. Said I wouldn't have to speak to him directly or see him in person, just record something on her phone that the negotiators could play. I looked at Mom and she gave me a small nod. Told Detective Powell I'd do it, but only if I didn't have to face him. She agreed immediately and said she'd be at my house in 20 minutes. Detective Powell arrived with a recording device and her phone. We sat at the kitchen table while she explained what kind of message would be most helpful. Said to keep it calm and non-accusatory. Acknowledge his feelings without agreeing with his actions. Remind him that people care about him and want him to get help. I asked if she really thought it would work. She said there were no guarantees, but it was worth trying. I took the phone and pressed record. Started talking even though my voice shook a little at first. Said I understood he felt invisible and unheard, that he wanted people to see him and take him seriously, but terrorizing people wasn't the answer. It just made everything worse. He needed help, and people were ready to provide that help if he'd let them. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, like I was talking to someone I'd never really known despite years of friendship. How had I missed that he was struggling this badly? Or maybe I hadn't missed it. Maybe he'd hidden it too well. I finished the message and handed the phone back to Detective Powell. She thanked me and said she'd get it to the negotiators right away. Then she left and I sat there feeling drained. Mom made tea and we waited. My phone stayed silent for almost 2 hours. Then Detective Powell called. Crimson had surrendered. Walked out of the storage facility with his hands up about 30 minutes after hearing my message. No resistance, no violence. Officers took him into custody without incident. Detective Powell's voice was gentle when she told me the rest. Said Crimson had been crying when he came out. Kept saying he just wanted someone to see him, that he felt invisible his whole life and didn't know any other way to make people pay attention. I felt this complicated mix of relief and sadness wash over me. Relief that it was over, that he was in custody and couldn't hurt anyone else, but also sadness for how twisted his thinking had become. How lonely and desperate he must have felt to believe that terrorizing people were his only option. I thanked Detective Powell for calling, and she said I should be proud of myself, that my message probably saved lives tonight. After we hung up, I just sat there for a long time trying to process it all. The next morning, Detective Powell called again with more news. Police had recovered a bag from the storage facility. Inside, they found 3 more decoy devices similar to the ones used at the school, and a knife, a real knife with a 6-inch blade. She said this confirmed that Crimson could have caused real harm if he'd chosen to escalate. The decoy devices were bad enough, but having an actual weapon meant his intentions might have been darker than anyone realized. I felt my stomach drop hearing that. Started thinking about all the ways things could have gone worse. If I'd made different choices. If he'd decided to use that knife instead of just the fake devices, how many people could have been hurt or killed? Detective Powell seemed to sense where my thoughts were going, reminded me that none of that happened, that everyone was safe because of the choices I made. I tried to hold on to that, to focus on the reality of what happened rather than the nightmare scenarios playing in my head. Later that afternoon, Detective Powell came by the house for a final detailed talk. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with a folder full of papers. Explained the charges Crimson would face, terroristic threats for the bomb scare and notes, false public alarm for the decoy devices, assault for our physical struggle in the hallway. The charges were serious enough that he'd likely face juvenile detention and mandatory counseling. She walked me through what to expect if the case went to trial. Said I might have to testify about what happened. Described the notes and the device and the chase through the school. She assured me I'd have support throughout the process. Victim advocates who could help me prepare and answer questions. Mom sat next to me taking notes about court dates and procedures. Detective Powell spent over an hour going through everything, making sure I understood each step and what my role would be. Before she left, she handed me her card and told me to call any time if I had questions or just needed to talk. Said I'd handled an impossible situation with remarkable courage, and she was honored to have worked with me. I thanked her for treating me with respect and keeping me informed. After she left, I felt this weird sense of closure, like a chapter was ending even though the story wasn't over yet. The next morning, Mom drove me to the school for a meeting with Principal Webster. We sat in her office with the door closed while she pulled up notes on her computer about what happened during the crisis. Principal Webster folded her hands on her desk and looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not angry exactly, but serious. She said I broke 3 major protocols during the lockdown: taking the classroom phone without permission, running through the halls when I should have evacuated, engaging directly with an active threat instead of getting to safety. Mom tensed up next to me and started to say something, but Principal Webster held up her hand. She continued talking and explained that normally any one of those violations would mean automatic suspension, but the circumstances were obviously different. The phone call I made saved 30 students and Mrs. O'Larson. The running drew Crimson away from populated areas. My choices kept people alive even though they went against every safety rule we teach. She paused and looked between me and Mom. Said she'd consulted with the district and they agreed that punishment didn't fit this situation. Instead, I'd be required to attend mandatory counseling sessions and participate in a student safety forum they were organizing. Mom relaxed a little and thanked Principal Webster for understanding. I just nodded, feeling this weird mix of relief and exhaustion. Principal Webster stood up and shook my hand before we left. Told me I showed remarkable judgment under impossible pressure, and she hoped I'd help them improve their protocols going forward. That evening, I was sitting on my bed trying to focus on homework when I heard the doorbell. Mom answered it, and a minute later knocked on my door saying Brendan was here. I went downstairs and found him standing awkwardly in the entryway. He asked if we could talk, and I grabbed my jacket so we could sit on the front porch. The sun was setting and the air had that cool edge that meant fall was really here. We sat on the steps for a long time, not saying anything. Finally, Brendan started talking. Said he was sorry for doubting me after everything went down. He explained that sitting in study hall not knowing what was happening or where I'd gone made him scared and confused. When rumors started flying about me being involved somehow, he didn't know what to believe. I told him I understood and apologized for not being able to explain things better in the moment. Said I was just reacting and trying to keep everyone safe the only way I could think of. We went back and forth like that for almost 2 hours, talking through every detail of what happened and how it felt from both perspectives. By the time it got dark, we'd covered everything, and the tension between us had dissolved. Brendan stood up to leave and punched my shoulder lightly. Said he was glad I was okay and that we were good. I watched him walk down the driveway feeling like I'd gotten my best friend back. When we returned to regular schedule a few days later, I was nervous about facing everyone. I grabbed my lunch tray and scanned the cafeteria, trying to decide where to sit. Jessica caught my eye from a table near the windows and gestured to the empty seat across from her. I walked over and sat down without making a big deal of it. We didn't talk much about what happened. She asked how I was doing, and I said, okay. She nodded and went back to her sandwich. But her sitting with me felt like a statement, like she believed my version of events and valued what I'd done, even if she wasn't going to make some big speech about it. We ate mostly in silence, just sharing space, and it felt comfortable. Natural. Other students glanced over occasionally, but nobody approached or asked questions. Jessica's quiet company was exactly what I needed. Proof that not everyone thought I was crazy or suspicious, that some people understood I'd made impossible choices and did the best I could. Detective Powell called me later that week with news about Crimson's interview. She said the prosecutors were sharing some of his statements with victims to help us understand what happened. She emailed me a document with excerpts from his police interviews. Reading through them made my stomach hurt. Crimson talked about feeling invisible for years, about watching people ignore him or look through him like he didn't exist. He'd become obsessed with this idea that everyone was secretly a coward, that people only acted decent because they never faced real tests. He wanted to create a situation that would expose what he saw as the truth about human nature, prove that when faced with actual danger, people would always choose themselves over others. He'd picked me specifically because we'd been friends, because he thought I represented this average, normal person who'd reveal their cowardice when pushed. Understanding his mindset didn't make me feel better. It didn't excuse anything he'd done, but it helped me make sense of how someone I'd known for years could do something so harmful. How resentment and feeling unseen could spiral into this twisted need to prove a point through terror. The prosecutors asked me to write an official victim impact statement for the court. I sat at my desk with a blank document open for an hour before I could start typing. Putting everything into words brought up stuff I'd been pushing down. That night, I had the worst nightmare since the incident happened. Woke up sweating and shaking at 3 a.m, unable to get back to sleep. Mom heard me moving around and came to check on me. I told her about the nightmares and she suggested calling Sang Cross even though it wasn't a scheduled session. I texted him the next morning and he called me back within an hour. We talked through what was happening, and he reminded me about the grounding techniques he'd taught me, helped me work through the panic using the coping strategies. He explained that writing the statement was forcing me to confront the trauma directly, and it was normal for suppressed feelings to surface. Said we'd focus on processing those responses in our regular sessions. By the end of the call, I felt steadier, still shaken but with tools to manage the spiral instead of drowning in it. Mrs. Larson sent an email to everyone from study hall a few days later. The subject line just said checking in, and I almost deleted it thinking it would be some generic teacher message. But when I opened it, the tone was different. She acknowledged what we'd all been through together. Said she recognized the bravery and resilience everyone had shown during an impossible situation. She included links to counseling resources and hotlines for anyone struggling with anxiety or trauma. Reminded us that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness. Her message felt exactly right, not melodramatic or over the top, just honest recognition of what happened and practical support for moving forward. I replied thanking her for the email, and she wrote back saying she was proud of how we'd all handled ourselves. That simple acknowledgement from a teacher who'd been there meant more than any public recognition could have. Principal Webster organized a student safety forum 2 weeks later. The school had revised their emergency drill procedures based on what happened, and they wanted student input on the changes. I sat in the auditorium with about 50 other students while Principal Webster walked through the new protocols. Better ID verification for anyone entering campus, additional security training for staff, clearer communication systems during lockdowns. When she opened the floor for comments and suggestions, I raised my hand, stood up and offered some brief remarks about trusting your instincts, about the importance of reporting threats even when you're not completely sure they're real, said that hesitation could cost lives and it's better to be wrong about danger than to ignore warning signs. Several other students shared their perspectives and concerns. The whole forum lasted over an hour and resulted in even more safety improvements. Seeing concrete changes come from something so terrible helped me feel like the experience had some kind of purpose, that maybe it could prevent future incidents or help other students stay safe. Media attention finally started fading after 2 weeks of constant coverage. The news vans disappeared from the school parking lot, and reporters stopped trying to contact students for interviews. But one unfair article lingered online claiming the school had mishandled the situation. It criticized Principal Webster's response time and questioned why Crimson had been able to enter campus with a fake uniform. Reading it made me angry because it ignored all the things that went right. How quickly police responded, how Mrs. Larson kept everyone calm, how the evacuation procedures worked exactly as designed. I wanted to write a response defending the school, but Mom talked me down, said I couldn't control every narrative and some people would always find fault regardless of the facts. Learning to accept that was hard, letting go of the need to correct every wrong story or misunderstanding. But eventually I realized she was right. I couldn't waste energy fighting every unfair take or inaccurate report. Detective Powell called with an update about Crimson's case 3 weeks after his arrest. The prosecutors had decided to offer him a plea deal, mandated psychiatric treatment and juvenile detention rather than pushing for adult charges. She explained that this meant I wouldn't have to testify in court, wouldn't have to sit across from Crimson and relive everything in front of a jury. The relief hit me so hard I actually felt dizzy. I hadn't realized how much anxiety I'd been carrying about the possibility of a trial, about having to face him again and answer questions from lawyers. Detective Powell said the plea deal reflected Crimson's age and mental state while still holding him accountable. That treatment was more appropriate than just punishment for someone whose actions came from such distorted thinking. I thanked her for letting me know, and she said I could call any time if I had questions about the legal process going forward. My counseling sessions with Sang Cross started showing real progress around the same time. The grounding techniques he'd taught me were working automatically now. When I felt panic rising, I could pull myself back to the present moment without conscious effort. My sleep improved from 3 or 4 hours a night to almost 7. I was learning to recognize the signs when I started spiraling, the physical sensations that meant my thoughts were heading somewhere dark. Sang helped me develop tools to interrupt those patterns before they took over completely. We talked about how healing wasn't linear, how I might have good weeks followed by hard days, and that didn't mean I was failing. Just that trauma recovery took time and patience. Sitting in his office during our sessions, I could feel myself getting stronger. Not back to who I was before because that person didn't exist anymore, but growing into someone who could carry what happened without being crushed by it. Principal Webster called an assembly the following week to address what she called community resilience. She stood at the podium in the gym talking about how different students had shown courage during the crisis without naming anyone specifically. Her words felt careful and measured, like she knew some of us didn't want the spotlight. She mentioned the teachers who kept their classrooms calm, and the office staff who followed protocols, and the students who looked out for each other. I sat in the bleachers next to Brendan, feeling relieved she wasn't pointing me out as some kind of hero. The truth was I'd been terrified and just trying to survive. After the assembly ended, Brendan leaned over and tapped his pencil against the metal bench in Morse code. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. Then he grinned and added more taps that spelled out LUNCH. I actually laughed for the first time in weeks. The easy humor between us felt like proof we could move past everything that happened. We grabbed our trays in the cafeteria and sat at our usual table. He made jokes about our history project being due soon and how we'd probably have to actually work on it instead of just talking about working on it. The normalcy of complaining about homework felt amazing, like we were just regular kids again instead of people who'd survived a bomb threat. Mom surprised me that evening by suggesting we get takeout instead of her usual home-cooked meal. We sat at the kitchen table with Chinese food containers spread between us. She pushed lo mein around her plate for a minute before saying she knew she'd been too strict since the incident. I told her I understood why she'd been scared. She admitted she'd been checking my location on her phone constantly and setting curfews that didn't make sense. We talked through some new boundaries that gave me more independence, while still letting her feel like she could keep me safe. She agreed to stop tracking my location during school hours. I agreed to text her when I got places and keep her updated about my plans. It felt good to negotiate like adults instead of her just making rules out of panic. I had to walk past the study hall a few days later to get to my next class. The door was propped open for cleaning, and I could see the scuff marks on the wall from where Crimson had slammed me. My chest got tight and my breathing started speeding up. But then I remembered what Sang had taught me about grounding. I stopped walking and focused on 5 things I could see: the trophy case, the water fountain, the exit sign, a poster about the winter dance, someone's dropped pencil, 4 things I could touch: the wall, my backpack straps, my phone in my pocket, the floor under my shoes, 3 things I could hear: voices from a nearby classroom, the hum of the heating system, my own breathing slowing down. I took one more deep breath and kept walking. The panic that would have crushed me weeks ago just faded into the background. My phone buzzed during lunch the next day with a text from Detective Powell. She said Crimson's case was officially closed. He'd taken the plea deal with mandated psychiatric treatment and juvenile detention. She thanked me for my cooperation throughout the investigation and said I could reach out if I ever had questions. Reading those words made something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I was still holding. It was truly over. No trial, no testimony, no having to see Crimson again. I could finally stop replaying everything and start looking forward instead of constantly checking behind me. Brendan and I presented our history project the following week. We'd actually managed to pull together a solid presentation about the Cold War, despite everything that had happened. Our teacher asked questions and we tag-teamed the answers like we'd been doing this stuff together forever. After class, Brendan mentioned how impressed he was with how I'd handled everything. Not just the presentation, but the whole situation with Crimson. His respect meant more than any public recognition could. The people who mattered knew the truth about what happened, and that was enough. A freshman stopped me in the hallway a few days later. He looked nervous and kept glancing around like he didn't want anyone to overhear. He said he'd been having panic attacks since the incident, that he couldn't sleep and kept thinking about what could have happened. I took him to an empty classroom and shared some of Sang's grounding techniques, the 5-4-3-2-1 method, the breathing exercises. I mostly just listened to him talk about his fears. Being able to help someone else process their trauma made me realize how far I'd come. I wasn't completely healed, but I had tools now. Ways to manage the anxiety instead of letting it control me. Mom handed me an envelope at dinner that weekend. Inside were tickets to a concert I'd mentioned wanting to see months ago. She said she knew I needed normal teenage experiences, not just therapy and processing. We went together the following Saturday. The venue was packed and loud, and I actually enjoyed myself without constant anxiety about what could go wrong. I sang along to songs I knew and bought an overpriced t-shirt and ate terrible nachos. Mom seemed happy just watching me be a regular kid having fun. The night felt like proof that life could be good again, that I could make new memories that weren't connected to fear. Principal Webster called another assembly to announce new safety measures the school was implementing. Better ID verification for anyone entering campus. Additional security training for all staff members. A new anonymous tip system for students to report concerns. She specifically mentioned that student input had helped make these changes meaningful. Seeing concrete improvements come from something so terrible helped me feel like the experience had some purpose, that maybe other students would be safer because of what we went through. Brendan invited me to join him and some other friends for a camping trip over spring break. His family rented a cabin in the mountains every year, and he wanted me to come along. I realized I was actually excited about the future rather than stuck in fear. The invitation felt like confirmation that my friendships had survived the trauma and were growing stronger. I told him yes without hesitation. Started planning what gear I'd need and looking forward to a weekend away from everything. The fact that I could think about the future with excitement instead of dread felt like the biggest victory of all. I sat down that evening and wrote Detective Powell a thank you note. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on paper from the drawer in the kitchen. I told her that throughout everything she treated me with respect and kept me informed when she didn't have to. That she made a terrible situation feel less scary just by being straightforward and honest with me. I mailed it the next day and didn't expect anything back. But 3 days later, she responded with her own note saying I made her job easier by being brave and honest. That most people in my situation would have panicked or shut down, but I stayed clear-headed enough to help. Her words validated something I'd been struggling with. That I handled an impossible situation as well as anyone could have. That I didn't mess up or make things worse like part of me worried I had. I kept her note in my desk drawer and reread it whenever doubt crept back in. Sangcross and I had our final scheduled counseling session 2 weeks later. He pointed out all the progress I'd made in managing anxiety and processing trauma. How I went from constant panic attacks to using grounding techniques automatically. How I could talk about what happened without spiraling into fear. How I was sleeping better and engaging with friends again. He reminded me that healing isn't linear, and I might have setbacks. That I could always reach out if I needed support. But he was confident I had the tools to keep moving forward. The session felt different from all the others. Less like treatment and more like a conversation between people who understood each other. I left feeling proud instead of drained. 3 months after the incident, I was doing genuinely well. Sleeping through most nights without nightmares waking me up. Engaging fully in the school and friendships instead of going through the motions. I still had moments where I thought about what happened. Walking past the hallway where Crimson pressed that button. Seeing someone in a security uniform. Hearing sudden loud noises. But those moments were becoming less frequent and less overwhelming. I could acknowledge them and move on instead of getting stuck. I was proud of how I'd grown through something that could have broken me. That I came out the other side stronger and more aware of what I could handle. That's it for today's story. Thanks for being here. It really means a lot to know these moments reach someone. I hope it added a bit of kindness or calm to your day. Subscribe if you'd like to keep that energy going.